It's Jim Paff, and welcome back to the Against Nice podcast, where we believe that nice people are the cruelest of all people because they're subjective and selfish in the way that they address society. Kind people have the interests of others in mind, but they speak truth into society. Follow us on iTunes, give us a 5-star rating, and also give us your review of the podcast. You can also follow us on Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and many other podcasting apps. Now let's get to the show. I am so looking forward to this interview today. One of my best friends and closest friends, Evan Sayet, a comedian who just has also a great understanding of what's going on in culture. This is a great interview with a really good friend. It's fun because he's got a great attitude, but he's got an incisive look into what's happening, as I say, in culture, in politics. He's got great ideas on what to do. His book, The Woke Supremacy, is kind of the foundation of what we're talking about. And he starts off saying woke supremacists, and frankly, that is a great way to describe the cancel culture that's taking place right now. Evan's got some great ideas on how to work through this, and this is one of those discussions you're going to enjoy from the outset, and I think it's going to be very informative to you. So without further ado, my interview with my great friend Evan Sayet, who, by the way, I should say, Evan wrote for the Arsenio Hall show way back in the day. He's written for Bill Maher. He's a fantastic conservative, and yeah, I think you're going to enjoy this. So again, now, second time, without further ado, let's talk to Evan Sayet. I am so looking forward to this interview today. One of my best friends and closest friends, Evan Sayet, a comedian who just has also a great understanding of what's going on in culture. This is a great interview with a really good friend. It's fun because he's got a great attitude, but he's got an incisive look into what's happening, as I say, in culture, in politics. He's got great ideas on what to do. His book, The Woke Supremacy, is kind of the foundation of what we're talking about. And he starts off saying woke supremacists, and frankly, that is a great way to describe the cancel culture that's taking place right now. Evan's got some great ideas on how to work through this, and this is one of those discussions you're going to enjoy from the outset, and I think it's going to be very informative to you. So without further ado, my interview with my great friend Evan Sayet, who, by the way, I should say, Evan wrote for the Arsenio Hall show way back in the day. He's written for Bill Maher. He's a fantastic conservative, and yeah, I think you're going to enjoy this. So again, now, second time, without further ado, let's talk to Evan Sayet.
I'm watching the riots, and I'm listening to the pundits, and I'm listening to the politicians. I'm even listening to some of the participants, and none of them seem to know really who and what the woke are. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote this almost as a primer, an introduction, because the first rule of war, and this is war, Jim, I hate to say it, but it's war.
That is.
You know, how bloody it's going to eventually get, I don't want to say. But the first rule of warfare is know thy enemy. And so I wrote this book so that both those who mindlessly are joining the woke thinking there's something they're not, but also to steal our side for the battle. I almost wrote it to be like Thomas Paine's Common Sense. Thomas Paine's.
Yeah.
Thomas Paine's Common Sense.
I tried so hard. There.
Exactly. I tried so hard not to say Thomas Sowell. That was like
said Thomas Paine. I love it. By the way, yeah. I mean, it's just that's hilarious, man. The woke is an interesting concept that is just seemingly popped out of nowhere. It was probably lingering in somebody's back basement or in that satanic ritual that was taking place in C.S. Lewis's That Hideous Strength, something like that. It's been hanging around there for a while. But it's kind of come on the scene. I mean, what's interesting about it is that I find myself wanting to use the word fascism more and more and more in relationship to this. I remember,
Yeah.
you and I are both fans of it. I remember reading Jonah Goldberg's Liberal Fascism,
Right.
which, by the way, he kind of left that now in his anti-Trumpism. I don't understand why, but he really did a good job in that and pointing out. He kind of stayed away from Hitler, although he kind of showed that. He really
Well,
pointed towards
that's where I pick it up because I don't stay away from Hitler.
no, and
Uh,
I think that's fine, especially Jewish as you are, this is a sensitive topic. I mean,
well,
it's real though too. I mean,
well, it should be real to anybody. It should be real to anybody. It wasn't, I mean, the Jews certainly suffered the brunt of it, but the entire world suffered at Hitler's hands. Whether it was my father who had to give up years of his life to go over to Europe to fight and risk his life and whatnot, whether it was all the displaced people. So it's not just, I mean, it was the entire world that was affected by it. I'll tell you exactly where wokeism came from. Where we are right now is the culmination of the 60s radicals. All right, wokeism is 60s radicalism. It's the same thing. It's democratic socialism. It's the desire for a revolution, the overthrow of the American government and its replacement with a utopian socialist ideology. Now, the founders of this movement, the radicals, were truly evil people. I mean, William Ayers and his wife were murderers and terrorists. Mark Rudd was bloodthirsty. I'll give you an idea just how evil these people are and were. At the very first meeting of William Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn's terrorist group, the Weather Underground, this was in 1969 in Flint, Michigan, they actually celebrated Charles Manson's murders that had just recently taken place. I mean, these are vile, sick people who murdered cops, Angela Davis, who actually incited children to murder their parents. It was William Ayers, okay, Barack Obama's buddy. Barack Obama kicked off his
mentor.
Yeah, his mentor. Right? He said, "Bring the revolution home. Kill your parents." All right, these were really vile, evil, and disgusting people who sought to foment a revolution, and first and foremost, doing so by starting race riots, by starting race wars.
Yeah.
Right. This is why when they had the choice at the very beginning of the radical movement, when they could have joined with the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. Right? They could have joined with the party, the Republicans, of women's suffrage, abolition, the 1957 Civil Rights Act, or the party of segregation, Jim Crow, slavery, George Wallace, and they decided to join the party of slavery, Jim Crow, and George Wallace. Why? Because it didn't matter to the revolutionaries whether Wallace made white people hate blacks or if Malcolm X made black people hate whites, just so long as there was hatred between the races. And that is something that Charles Manson sought to start. That's what he called Helter Skelter, was this massive apocalyptic race war. And that's why William Ayers and his followers cheered Manson. What happened was the revolutionaries failed. Right? They simply could not attract enough normal people who had seen socialism, who had fled it from Russia, from Stalinist Russia, who had fled it from Nazi Germany, or who had gone overseas like my father to fight it and saw the horrors of socialism. They couldn't get the people from the greatest generation who knew the real world to join their moronic, violent, and hateful movement. And so they sort of went underground. They did what we call the long march through the institutions. They slowly took over, through attrition, natural attrition, but also by purging, and sometimes at gunpoint, like at Columbia University, where they put a gun to the president's head and took over the school and never relinquished it. Right? And they turned academia and education into their ministry of indoctrination. They turned news and entertainment into their ministry of propaganda. Now they've got the ministry of social communications. And it was Mark Rudd, just this really evil, disgusting human being. Everybody who was a democratic socialist as a founding member was as evil and disgusting as you can be. I mean, truly bloodthirsty human beings, mentally ill human beings. And Mark Rudd said the true flowering of the 60s will come in the 90s when we've taken over the institutions. Well, he was wrong only because he missed the obvious. Once they took over the institutions, they needed one more generation to use those institutions to brainwash. So from the 60s to the 90s is 30 years. What's 30 years from the 90s?
That would be the 20s, 2020s.
That would be 2020. All right, which is why you now see them finally taking off their masks again, calling themselves socialists again, calling for the murder of cops again. Bernie Sanders uses the word revolution again. This is simply the sick mindset of the 60s radicals, but now with an army of social justice warriors brainwashed into hatred for America.
Yeah. And listen, I remember our academic institutions. You know, I tell people are going to get tired on the podcast because I repeated this story, I think, 3 times.
You were there at the founding. Of course you remember.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So in the mid 80s, I remember I was in a political class, actually, political science class. A professor at Indiana University who was a liberal, more in the JFK mold, but I mean, a little influenced by the 60s radicalism at the time. But we're talking about John Stuart Mill and utilitarianism. Now, knowing, as I was learning at that time or understanding, that Mill and Bentham, his mentor, were atheists, I'm just rejecting it all. I mean, I'm a brand new Christian. I'm a young kid, man, vim and vigor. This John Stuart Mill, you know. And he pulled me aside after class one time because I was very vocal in class. And he says to me, hey, Jim, you might not understand this. I mean, like utilitarianism, I know it's not the perfect conservative thing, but it kind of fits. So it would be important for you to spend some time understanding the philosophy so you can see how it aligns with, I mean, he actually was helping me. He actually was being thoughtful about wanting me to learn. That would not happen in an academic institution in this day and age.
Oh, absolutely
It has been so taken over.
Yeah, in fact, not even one iota. You know, my book's called The Woke Supremacy, because I argued that wokeness is, in fact, socialism in general is a supremacist ideology.
Yeah.
Right? When you believe, first of all, it's a globalist ideology. That's why Marx said workers of the world unite. He didn't say workers of Russia. He didn't say workers of Europe. He said workers of the world unite, because it was intended to be a global revolution. Right. And if you listen even to the nicest telling of socialism from the nicest guy who you can imagine, John Lennon, you know, and in the song Imagine, there are 3 prerequisites. There are 3 requisites for the utopia that socialism always promises. Now, the utopia each of them imagined is different. The utopia that Stalin imagined was different than the paradise that Hitler imagined, is different than the universe that Mao imagined, and it's different than what the democratic socialists imagined. But nonetheless, the 3 prerequisites for the perfect society, whatever that perfect society is that there be no personal possessions, that there be no countries, and that there be no religion. Right? The idea is that without personal property, there won't be greed, there won't be there won't be jealousy. Without government, without nations, there won't be xenophobia and wars for glory. And without God, there won't be the belief that God's on my side and we must take over the world. I mean, it really is, in its most simplistic form, they see it as a really positive world. The problem is that the 3 requisites for the perfect socialist world are also the 3 requisites for the authoritarianism and totalitarianism that socialism has never yet failed to bring. That's because without personal possessions, the individual doesn't have the ability to stand up to a tyrannical government. Right? Without other nations, there are no other armies strong enough to oppose the globalist leaders' rules. And without God, there's no moral mandate above that of the dictator to countermand his dictates. And so even if you eventually were able to get to that perfect world where you've eliminated all the people who believe in the rights to personal property, the fruits of their own labor, even if you succeeded in eliminating all the people who appreciate the protection of national sovereignties, even if you eliminate all the people who believe in the moral teachings of whatever religion they believe, even once you get there, you still have an authoritarian and totalitarian government ruling all the world with all the money. That's what socialism is.
Yeah.
So, they don't mean there's no possessions. We'll have laptops. I mean, if you watch, I was just watching the movie 1984 last night. They have television sets. It just doesn't belong to them.
Yeah, that's right. Well, by the way, it's really important to point out here. First of all, we don't train kids in logic and rhetoric anymore on some of these fundamental things.
Quite the opposite.
Yeah, quite the opposite. And so here's the logical fallacy, which I thought was beautifully described by Milton Friedman in his Phil Donahue interview from back, I think it was 74 maybe.
I just watched it the other day.
Yeah, and I share it quite a bit. So for the listener that hasn't heard of it, so Phil Donahue starts out by saying, gosh, when you look at the inequalities in the world and all, do you ever have a problem about capitalism and greed? And his response is, well, wait a minute, let's talk about greediness here. So what he points out basically fundamentally is that is the basic problem that Madison understood in Federalist, I think 54. If angels could rule over us, then we wouldn't need government.
Well, that's a problem twofold. One, they do have to believe that the leadership are angels. They have to believe that they're superhuman.
Correct.
They also have to believe themselves to be inferior because they need the superhuman God or parent or what was the other word? Well, slave owner ultimately, but. Mm-hmm. There's a run in my book, The Woke Supremacists, where I quote one after another Democrat talking about Barack Obama. Evan Thomas from Newsweek magazine said, I was on with Chris Matthews, and he said, Obama is like God. Yeah. He then later said, Obama is the teacher. Right. Then I quote Michelle Obama, who's talking to a leadership conference, and she was asked about her husband's 8 years in office. And she said it was like having the good parent at home, the one who tells you to eat your peas and when to go to bed on time. And this is, in fact, how they see themselves as children. They see their leaders as gods and teachers and parents. And in fact, it was, well, of course, Orwell, who saw it as Big Brother with his little siblings. Right. We call it the nanny state, but the Nazi Germans, the socialist Germans, had a name for their leader. They called him Der Führer. Yeah. Der Führer means the teacher or the guide.
Right.
That's how they see government, is as the big brother who's going to take care of them, and they see themselves as children.
Yeah, they do. And it is interesting when you analyze, as Montesquieu did, the different forms of government. So if you look at pure dictatorship, you've got to get to that godlike way of thinking of that person. When you get to monarchy, this is where respect comes in. You got to respect the leader, which is just another form of this. So we look at that person, and it would be dishonorable to go against the king, Whereas when we get to the Republican form of government, we get to examples of the bucolic, the independent, the isolated, but the coming together as a community of individuals. I mean, the whole rhetoric is different.
Right. I mean, the difference can be found in the fact that Barack Obama has followers and Donald Trump has supporters. That we recognize that the job of our government is to represent our interests, not to tell us what's right for us. That's what the Democrats believe. That's what the socialists believe. They believe that it's up to the government to tell us to eat our peas and to go to bed on time. There's a quote from Michael Bloomberg in my book, The Woke Supremacists. I'm sorry, I even get my own book's title wrong. It's The Woke Supremacy, an anti-socialist manifesto. And Michael Bloomberg is quoted, and I'm going to have to paraphrase now, but he says, some people say that taxes are regressive. Because if a tax is, let's say, 10% sales tax, well, that hurts the poor more than it hurts the rich. And he said, and that's the good thing about them, because the problem with people who don't have money is them, and by putting these taxes on them, we'll get them to better treat themselves the way they should be treating themselves.
Wow, I've never heard that before. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean that was that was absolutely accurate in its essence. The wording,
Yeah.
I didn't know all that well. But
Yeah.
and in fact, the Democrats use taxes today the way the Democratic slave owners used chains back in the day to control the behavior of people that they think of as children, as mentally inferior. In fact, there was a philosopher back in maybe 175 years ago named Fitzhugh. I can't believe I can't think of his first name because I've been seeing it for the last year as I write this book. But and he said that slavery is a form of socialism. In fact, it's the best form of socialism. What he means by best is that it's the purest.
Yeah.
It's the purest, all right?
Yeah.
It's the one in control who knows better than the childlike person,
Right.
And that's what Democrats thought blacks were. In fact, all the way to the 50s and beyond, Democrats still called grown black men boy.
Well, by the way, what's one of the basic legal constructs of communist or socialist states is the lack of free movement. I mean, that's just a form of slavery. Yet it's interesting to me when you talk about taxes, because we should really repeal the 16th Amendment. It's been a scar on our society ever since it was implemented. And for this reason, because the productive labor of a person comes about in the wages they receive for the work they do, the increase that they get from what they do in their businesses and the labor they put into that. And you are essentially controlling the productive effort of an individual when you do these taxes. Prior to this, you did not see an attitude in this country of reliance upon the government, need for the government. There was actually a decent amount of disrespect for the government. You might respect the individuals, but you always question the government. That's flipped on its head after, I think, now 4 generations of the income tax.
Mm-hmm. So you blame it on the income tax, but certainly
and the welfare state.
And the welfare state, which eliminates one of the most essential, absolutely essential. It divorces reward from merit.
Yes.
When you are taking away rightful reward for hard work and increasing the reward for sloth, you are skewing the desire to produce. All right, the person who works hard is going to work less hard if he's making less money, and the person who wasn't working at all isn't going to work any harder if he's getting more money by sitting around. Yeah. I mean, this divorcing of reward from merit is so central that communism and socialism actually, from those according to their ability to those according to their need. And to paraphrase Ayn Rand, what this means is that in a capitalist society, in order to get more for yourself, for your family, for your children, for your neighbors, you have to prove yourself more needed. Right? Somebody has to say, I need you to fix my car because you're the best. Whereas in a socialist society, you need to get more for yourself. You need to prove yourself more needy. Yes. That you need more, that you are less capable. If you're capable, then you should be producing more. So you need to prove yourself incapable. Whereas in a capitalist system, you have to prove yourself more capable. Yeah. And something your audience and everybody should understand is that capitalism is a bit of a misnomer in that every system is capitalist. Yeah. The question is, who controls the capital? That's right. Is it going to be the masses, the mainstream, the people who earn it and work for it? Or is it going to be a handful of elite who confiscate all the possessions and all the money and all the resources? But at the same, there's still money. There's still capital. It's just a matter of, is it going to be a czar? Is it going to be a king? Is it going to be by the way, is it going to be a Congress and a president that gives special benefits to certain large corporations? I mean, I go back to the whole TARP incident and the economic decline. And I had good friends in the banking industry, and it was amazing to watch what was happening. I was on the radio in Denver at the time. You and I were doing our thing from time to time on there as well. But what I was finding out as TARP was passed, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, that bailed out large banks. On the other side of it, the FDIC was closing small banks. People are not aware of the decimation
of the small banking industry in this country since then.
The community bank, of the local
Community banks,
you know,
that community bank is a highly specific legal term in terms of this, but you had small commercial banks, community banks, the ICBA, which is the Community Bankers Association that when I worked on Capitol Hill would lobby us. I mean, they're decimated as an organization. And so they would take these small banks that they said couldn't survive. They closed them down forcibly. The FDIC did this and handed them to mid-sized banks. Mm-hmm. I mean, they got rid of the local banker to the point where when I was working for Congressman Tim Huelskamp from Kansas, there are counties in that first district of Kansas that are no larger than 2,000 or 3,000 people, counties. Mm-hmm. And commercial banks could not, especially after the regulations of the Barack Obama administration, could not make loans for houses less than $100,000. They couldn't do it. In other words, so they go out of business, many of them. We have lost that. That takes away more individual liberty, but it's corporatist in that it take away competition from these big banks. And it's insane. And it's all government directed. That is not capitalism. That is a something close to socialism.
Indeed. Sorry, I had to mute you for a moment. I thought a sneeze was coming on. I didn't know. Was I supposed to duck out camera range? I don't know what these.
Hey, I already got to do that twice. You've only done it once. I've done it 2 or 3 times so far. So there you go.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it at every level, the socialist seeks to take away the local and then regional and then national until they get to global. Right. That's their goal, is to take away. Well, let's start even with personal autonomy.
Yeah.
Then eliminate the family, which is their goal. Eliminate the church and eliminate the nation state, and eventually, and so you look and you go, well, they're not really globalists yet because it comes in steps. It's incremental, and social. Look, Hitler didn't take over the world before he took over, Poland. Yeah. And question for you. We're on tape. Can we pause this for a moment? There's somebody very important at my front door.
Yeah, go ahead. I can. We can do. Just keep going. I'll cut it. I'll edit it.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. I want to take a quick break right here so we can get to some of our sponsors. We want to take a moment here right in the middle of the podcast just to tell you how incredibly important it is that you go to www.politicsisn'tnice.com as you get more information about the important things we're talking about today and get other insights into different information and join our email list. There's a button right at the top right-hand portion of the web page where you can join our email list. Also, go to facebook.com/againstnice. Twitter handle is Against Nice. You can follow us on Instagram at Against Nice as well, and on Parler at Against Nice. All of our social media is available to you, and of course, you can follow us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and many other podcasting apps so that you can get the podcast immediately when it comes out. And be sure to give us a 5-star rating and let people know what you think about this broadcast and the others that we have there. Again, www.politicsisn'tnice.com.
Well, look how handsome I am.
Yeah, totally, man. All you need is Van Dyke now, and then you'll be perfect.
You know what? If I could grow one, I would. I've never been able to grow a beard. It always comes in and then goes straight under here, and I end up looking like Abraham Lincoln every time. So I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't. Yeah.
Well, even though he did kind of expand the power of the state somewhat, but he's still great in many ways. So picking back up. So you say woke supremacy. So give me some more input about the book. What other ideas are you trying to lay out there? Because we already know that Democrats and maybe not all Democrats, I'm talking about rank and file voters, but people of the left who are in power in this country, they do not hold the American ideal at all. And I think it's funny that you accidentally were saying supremacist instead of woke supremacy, because it's interesting. the whole concept of is it takes one to know one. I mean, they're the ones that are the first to say that we got white supremacists out there, and they'll find a couple of them, David Duke and maybe a couple other people.
Yeah, but
But the thing is, they're the supremacists.
Well, that's the point of my book. I mean, that's why it's called The Woke Supremacy. And I lay out over and over and over again how they are no different than the white supremacists. They're no different than the German Nazi supremacists. They're no different than the Islamist supremacists. They all have a belief that rights, privileges, and protections only belong to those who share the supreme trait. White supremacists believe that rights and protections only belong to whites. The Nazis believe that rights and protections only belong to the Aryans. The Islamists believe only rights and protections belong to those who are appropriately pious to Muhammad. And they believe all rights and privileges belong only to those who share the woke ideology. And as globalists, they don't see themselves as Americans. They see themselves as citizens of the world. All right? And as such, no nationalist document like an oath of office or a constitution do they see as any sort of constraint in their practices, in their policies. This is why Barack Obama was able to weaponize the American government against its own citizens. Which citizens? The ones who aren't part of the woke supremacy. See, if you're a nationalist, you believe all rights belong to the citizens, equally to the citizens of that nation. And you can really see the difference in how these two sides think about these things, in how each side protests what they righteously believe are their grievances. Mm-hmm. Nationalist protests are peaceful, are even joyous. I mean, they don't commit crimes. They don't even litter. Typically, they leave the place cleaner. They fill out the proper paperwork. They stay in their assigned places. There's no property damage. Compare and contrast the Democratic protests. They're violent, and the more violent, the better. The rioting, there's looting, and they beat people up to prevent them from exercising their constitutional rights. You know, when and they don't even try to hide this. You know, when the woke go to shut up Ben Shapiro or Candace Owen or Charlie Kirk on college campuses, they're making it very clear their goal is to deny these people their constitutional right of free speech. Their goal is to use violence to intimidate people from not using their constitutional right to assemble peaceably to hear an alternative point of view.
And by the way, we just had the Democrat National Convention happen. If people think that the national Democrat politicians don't both support and encourage this, just take what Elizabeth Warren said during the Democrat National Convention. She said that they were coming after the Republicans that weren't going to vote for Joe Biden. That's essentially what she said. And they intend to shut these people down.
But Barack Obama said, "Get in their faces." Yeah, right? That's not how you conduct politics in a nationalist setting. No, you don't get in the faces. All right, it was Maxine Waters who said, "Make these people understand they're not welcome here." It was Andrew Cuomo who said that they're not welcome in the state of New York. That's a supremacist ideology, that if you don't possess the trait of wokeness, all right, the Soviets called the supreme trait proletarian, or the worker. The Nazis said the supreme trait was possessed by those they called the Aryan. Well, the Democrat says the supreme trait is possessed by those they call the woke. And if you're a woke American, you're entitled to get on jet planes and rape underage children on Epstein's Island. Mm-hmm. But if you're not a member of the woke, you're not allowed to walk down the street without being punched in the face. Yeah. All right? This is a supremacist ideology.
There's no doubt about it. These people have lived literally in their ivory towers for a long period of time, whether it was in academia or politics, sometimes in business as well, the corporatists. You see some of a lot of CEOs of major corporations are fantastic people who think of others and they're just trying to run great businesses. But you've got these, a strain of these, and you see them on television all the time. And most of them, the vast majority of them, they are willing to comply to all this and force it on you through their company structures. It's amazing.
That's one of the things that terrifies me the most about where we are, trying to gauge where we are. And that is that corporate America has decided that it's more lucrative to lie on behalf of the supremacists than it is to tell the truth on behalf of America.
Yeah.
And the first one that I really recognized doing this was Nike, where if you know anything about sports, you know that Colin Kaepernick sucked. You know that Colin Kaepernick wasn't benched and didn't lose his job because he took a knee. He took a knee because he'd already been benched. He was a second stringer. He was so bad at this point. There's actually a video. Let me remember if I can remember the Google search words that'll get you there. But St. Louis disrespects Kaepernick. Type that into Google and watch the video. He's the quarterback. He's on his own 2-yard line. That means there's 98 yards down the field for a touchdown. And the people defending his wide receivers don't even defend them. They stand on the line of scrimmage. They leave the 2 receivers wide open because they know that Kaepernick is so bad at this point that he can't even see his own players. They were giving up a touchdown because they knew that Kaepernick couldn't do it. He was awful. Nike knows he was awful, but they put this lie out there like the Democrats will constantly lie, like they lie about Michael Brown, like Joe Biden continues to lie about Michael Brown. But Joe Biden does it because he's a power hungry, but Nike doesn't have to promote this lie, and yet they do. And then you see Goodyear do it, and then you see the other. And if corporate America has decided the money is in lying on behalf of the supremacy, that's a really bad sign.
It's a really bad sign because they can throw a lot of money in it. The other thing is, what's interesting too is it goes against their interests financially, but they're making enough. Well, I think in the long run it won't, but in the short run it does because they've been making money, and now they're doing this shift at a high point, or at least at a point where they're relatively safe. It won't pay off in the long run. I'm going to tell you, free thinkers, and people who have the liberty to pursue their own interests, as Milton Friedman used to like to say, that they, in the long run, will end up winning as long as the society stays free.
Right, but that's the key, is so long as society stays free.
That's right.
But society's not going to stay free so long as they're beating us up. And then you have the mayor of Portland backing them, not arresting them, not prosecuting them. Then you have the schools indoctrinating them. Then you have the news media lying to them. We're getting up there in age, Jim, and we're going to fall off the edge of the cliff soon to be replaced by another generation that has been fully brainwashed into the lunacy of the supremacy.
Well, do we really believe that generation has been fully brainwashed, or do we have any hope for it?
Well, there are some indications that they've had enough, that this new generation, every generation since the supremacist takeover, starting, let's say, in the 80s or the 90s, has gotten worse along the way, of a sense of entitlement, the mental illness of narcissistic personality disorder, their sense of victimhood and victimization, their embrace of total nonsense like 197 genders, hatred for those of us who don't walk in lockstep with them. But this last generation is showing some clues that they might want to know, that it's gone so far that they want to know the truth, that they want to go see Ben Shapiro. They don't agree with him because they don't know, but they want to go hear Jordan Peterson. They seek out Joe Rogan. So there is some reason to have hope about this latest generation, but it might be even too late by then, because 90% of a supremacy are not the supremacists themselves. They're only 10% of the Germans were Nazis. Right. Only 10% of Muslims are Islamicist terrorists. Only 10% of the Democrats in the South were members of the KKK. All right, it's the 90% 20% who simply enable the supremacy because they've been so steeped in and surrounded by the narratives of the supremacy that they simply take it for granted and don't give it a moment's thought. There's an example in my book. I'm talking about Bruce Springsteen, and he's singing about being born in the USA, and he explains what the Vietnam War was about. He says, got in a little hometown jam, so they put a rifle in my hand, set me off to a foreign land to go and kill the yellow man. So the Vietnam War was because Americans are racist. There was no real reason for it. They were just yellow. We were white, and he was sent there to kill the yellow man. What a horrible thing if that were true, that America is so racist that we would go ourselves or send our sons and our daughters to these horrible places in order to kill people based on their skin color. The problem is not only isn't it true, it's diametrically opposed to the truth. And most disconcerting is Springsteen would have known this had he given it even a moment's thought. Because no matter how little Springsteen knew about the Vietnam War, he had to have known that while the North Vietnamese did in fact have yellow skin, so too did the South Vietnamese.
Yeah, who were fighting beside.
Who were fighting beside in order to protect. And therefore, if both people had yellow skin, it couldn't be for the... But here's Springsteen, not a stupid man, not an untalented man, not a mentally incapable human being, but yet he took this vile slander against Americans that were racist as a given because that's what he was steeped in and surrounded by. He's not a woke supremacist. He's a woke supremacist enabler, and that's more of what's to be concerned about. Because again, if it's just the 10%. We're just back to the 1960s with hateful, vile, vicious democratic socialists who can't foment a revolution because nobody would follow them.
And by the way, your analysis works when you also take into consideration a lot of the foolish decisions that the government made that made the Vietnam War so unwinnable when it would have been, and even the argument about whether to go or not still doesn't fit in this racist paradigm because there were a lot of stupid mistakes made around that. None of them racist.
That's correct. Look, we can talk about tactics and timing, or even whether it was the spread of socialism, which, by the way, every war that America has been in for the past 100 years has been for no other reason than to stop the spread of a vile, vicious, atrocious, supremacist movement. All right, we entered World War II to fight to prevent the further spread of Hitler's socialist regime. The Cold War was fought to slow the spread of the Soviet socialist empire. The Vietnam War was entered to prevent the proxies of the Soviets from entering, and the Korean War was fought to stop the Chinese proxies. So that's every time. The only wars that we've entered, once Nazi Germany was defeated, and once the Soviet Socialist Empire crumbled, the only other wars that we've been involved in have been against Islamicist supremacist movements, and their atrocities. So it's really quite telling, and that's because we're nationalists. We're not globalists. If we were globalists, we first of all, we would have taken over Canada and Mexico.
Yeah. You know? Well, actually, we might have avoided Mexico, but I get what you're saying.
Actually, I was thinking we would have avoided Canada. You see the weather? Are you kidding?
See, I know, but the weather's bad. They're weird French people. You know, I mean, what would we do that for?
You can't find a doctor outside of a major city.
So true. But hey, they got cowboys in Winnipeg, you know, so maybe it's not all bad.
Oh, no, it's not all bad. This is Winnipeg.
Yeah, there is Winnipeg. Calgary and Winnipeg. So anyway, but yeah, no, there's
an expression about Montreal, which is better than France, not quite America.
so true. Yeah, well, you know, and I think what concerns me most is the lack of reaction that you described of the 90%. And this is why you and I have talked about this for years. We've been friends for a lot of years. And you know, because I've talked to you about a lot, this whole concept of against nice, which I finally did on a podcast, talking to Peter Schweitzer, my friend, one day. And I'm like, I've been thinking about this book I want to write. And he's like, well, just go do the podcast. Let people know what you're thinking and just build it from there. So this whole concept of Against Nice is not to train people to be mean, but to train them to be kind. But I'm going to tell you this, any parent would never be considered kind who didn't discipline their child, and no child being disciplined thinks it's very nice.
There's also a medical condition or a psychological condition of compassion without moral and rational thought. It's called codependence.
Right.
When you have compassion for bad people, that's not good for them, nor is it good for their victims.
That's right.
And if you look at the abortion issue, which the Democrats claim is out of compassion for the woman, no, it's not. It's out of animus for the child.
Yeah.
When they portray themselves as caring about the illegal aliens, no, they don't. They just have disdain for their victims.
What's really interesting to me too was just this year in 2020 that during woke culture, during the Black Lives Matter protests, that Planned Parenthood finally decides, hey, we got to get rid of this Margaret Sanger person. But why did they do it? They only did it because it became embarrassing. Their ideology still hasn't changed. Yeah. You there still?
All right, something really screwy is going on here.
No, it's your internet. I'll edit it out. It's all good. Okay, there you go.
All right.
You're good. Yeah, but so they just cancel Margaret Sanger now, but they've never canceled the ideology behind it. I was talking to my friend Troy Newman, who runs Operation Rescue. We were having this discussion the other day. It's like it's still in New York State. More than half of black babies are killed through abortion of all pregnancies. Right. This is happening right now. And her eugenicist ideas haven't left, even if not every Planned Parent person connected with Planned Parenthood thinks of eugenics every day. It's the principle's still there.
And by the way, eugenics is very much a socialist idea.
It is.
In that you're trying to create the perfect society that if somebody is lacking in what you consider the supreme trait, whether, obviously Hitler was big into eugenics.
The Nietzschean Uberman. I mean, that's really what you're looking for.
There was a whole chapter in my book until I cut it out, all about the Ubermensch. Yeah. And that's what they're trying to create is the Ubermensch. And it's the same thing in China with the one baby with the one child rule, and the rest of them are murdered. The rest of the babies are murdered. It's trying to create this perfect society. And you'll notice we nationalists never say utopia or promised paradise. We say make America great again, not perfect. All right, we say America is exceptional, not perfect. All right, even the founders said in order to form a more perfect union. All right, so it's the left that always promises paradise, and in order to get to paradise, they have to walk us through hell. They have to eugenicize us. They have to, in the book, The Woke Supremacy, an anti-socialist manifesto, when I'm quoting John Lennon, it says, in order for all the people to live as one, all the others need to in some way be dealt with.
Yeah.
Right? For everybody to live as one, you have to get rid of all the others. Now, the others have been different depending on which socialist incarnation. The others in Marxism and Stalinism were the bourgeoisie. The other in German socialism were the Jews and the gypsies and the handicapped and the gay. And the other in the woke supremacy are those of us who aren't woke.
I mean, cancel culture is just a cultural expression of abortion. Let's just be honest about
it. It's one of the most important little runs in my book, which is that I point out Hitler didn't imagine a world of gas chambers and ovens. He imagined the world after the gas chambers and ovens had served their purpose.
Yeah, that's right.
Stalin didn't imagine a world of gulags and permanent confinement to frozen tundra. He imagined the world after the others had been vanquished. Mao didn't imagine a world with millions of bodies littering the countryside. He imagined the perfect world that would come after the killing fields. Well, the Democratic Socialist doesn't imagine the horrors that they visit upon those of us who don't agree with them. The setting fires, the shooting, the blinding with lasers, the hitting over the head of Andy No and whatnot. They imagine the world after we've all been vanquished and all been taken care of. And even Marx, in the perfect theoretical telling of socialism, knew that there had to be a dictatorship of the proletariat. There had to be the violent and evils to take care of all of the others before they could then get to their workers' paradise. Well, that's where we are right now. This is the dictatorship of the proletariat. This is the dictatorship of the woke doing these horrible things to us. And the gulags and the death camps and the killing fields, right, they were simply the more primitive technologies from earlier cancel cultures.
Yeah. And by the way, there is a bumper sticker for the woke supremacist. It says, "Mean people suck."
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, people seriously put that bumper sticker on their car because of exactly what you were talking about in its various forms. And they believe with their whole hearts, some of them, that we have got to get rid of these mean people. And they're being mean. It's just like, it's really interesting. And they don't have a grasp on the hypocrisy of their statements, the illogical manner in which they promote their ideals.
Well, that's because their ideals are their original purpose. And their original purpose is not to be mean to us. Their original purpose is a world without us.
Right, exactly.
Then it'll be all peaceful. It'll be all wonderful. It was Nancy Pelosi who said, and if there is some collateral damage to those who do not share our views, then so be it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, they see the people that they're mean to as just the collateral damage, and it's very frightening, by the way, when government sees us as collateral damage and sees their original purpose not in upholding the Constitution, not in representing their constituents, but in
Portland and Seattle right now under BLM protests.
Right?
It's the same thing,
right?
Yeah.
Same thing.
Just collateral damage. The mayor of Baltimore says we need to give people room to destroy. And it's like,
but you'll notice in almost all these cases, as soon as they show up at the mayor's house, that's the end of that belief.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That's the mayor, who, by the way, just a few weeks. This is Chicago you're referring to. Who earlier, when she shut down all the barbershops, went and got her hair done and then explained it by saying, well, I'm in the public sphere here, so, I got to be. It's just like, are you crazy?
But this seems like hypocrisy, but it's not. And the reason it's not hypocrisy is because they see themselves as the adults. All right, they see themselves as the God, as the teacher, and the rules that apply to God aren't the same rules that apply to mortals. The rules that apply to the teacher, they say don't smoke in the bathroom, and then they go outside and smoke.
Well, this is the ideal of the secular God, by the way, because the God who is real has real demands upon human beings that he already is fulfilling that we can't fulfill because 6,000 years of recorded human history proves the moral depravity of man. Our problem is ours. It's not his, whereas they definitely do see themselves as having different rules. That's their concept of what we say is God, too.
It's not like when they get on those private planes to fly to those environmental, man-made global warming conferences, or when, I forget the actor's name, but he takes his 600-foot yacht. I don't even know what size it would be.
Leonardo DiCaprio, I think it is.
DiCaprio, yep, Leonardo DiCaprio, and they don't think of themselves as being hypocritical. They think those are the rules for the children. We're the adults here. We're the gods. The rules don't apply to us. And it's the same thing with Lori Lightfoot. The people over there, no. Protect my home because I'm a god. It's a very frightening thing when leaders think they're gods.
It really is, which is why we have this Constitution thing that created, which created a government that was not created by the government, but that was created by the people and their consent.
And that our rights came from God, not from Leonardo DiCaprio or Black Lives Matter, or whoever's going to punch us in the face if we try to talk to each other.
No, there's no doubt about it. So here's the problem. So there's a scripture that I use when I'm laying out the fact that we must engage in culture. Those who believe in the truth, those who want to submit to eternal truths that aren't made up by them, like socialists make up. And that is this, Micah 6:8. He, God, has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Evan, here's the problem. I don't see enough people of goodwill, and you've referred to this a little bit, determined to do justice. Because you know what? Well, it's a scary thing, and there's a price to be paid.
Well, those are two very important aspects to it. But good is always at a disadvantage against evil. And that is that good is constrained by its goodness, whereas evil is constrained by nothing. And this, in fact, is something that the evil Saul Alinsky, this is a man whose manifesto doesn't even pretend to be moral. It is simply a book for the bloodthirsty who are lusting for power and are willing to get it through any means necessary. He says it quite point blank in the book. He says the purpose of this book is for those who wish to change the world from what it is to what they want it to be. Well, Hitler wanted to change the world from what it is to what he wanted it to be. Mao wanted to change the world from what it is to what he wanted it to be. So by Alinsky's own acknowledgement, the book that they use as their war manual, that they use as their gospel, Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, could just as easily have been written for the next Hitler.
By the way, originally dedicated to Satan, and in subsequent printings pulled out.
The left gets you on this one. It was not dedicated It was not dedicated to the devil. He paid tribute to the devil.
Yes. No, I think that's a fair distinction. But I mean, and what he said was the first organizer that made his own world. I mean, that was basically
lest we forget the very first radical, Lucifer.
Right.
And he goes off from there. That's certainly in my book.
And I'm not trying to say he was a Satanist, but he was definitely into that concept of revolution and radicalism.
Well, he was into that concept of it doesn't matter who or what you are or what your agenda is or what you hope to accomplish. Even the devil can use this book. And the fact that one of the rules for radicals is make the other side live up to their rule book. Because he knew that our rule book is the Constitution. Our rule book is the Bible. And therefore, if we live up to and that's why so many on our side have been slow to the fight, because the fight's going to require us to go beyond what our books say. We're going to have to, just like when the Palestinians terrorists wrap themselves in innocent civilians. And that puts the good Jew. And what do? Do I kill an innocent civilian or do I let the terrorists get away with murder? Mm-hmm. And at some point, you've got to just say, it's unfortunate, but I got to kill that terrorist. But if they can force you to play by your own set of morals, you are at a distinct disadvantage against the immoral.
Which, by the way, is a canard anyway, because you can play by your own morals. Here's the problem, in my opinion. Is you can live up to your moral, and I do this in politics all the time, Evan. I've spent so long trying to win things in politics. I can tell you this: the methodology, in my opinion, is to follow the Patton statement. No bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country. The reality is that you need to make them, and politics is war by other means. You need to make them pay for the ideals that they have. Now, you're exactly right. They have no constraints They'll
Right.
come from any way they can and break any rules.
But I agree with you about an aspect, a group, a percentage of the people who are supremacist enablers, woke supremacist enablers, in that they've done the cost benefit equation and they've come to recognize there's tons of benefits to supporting the supremacy. You get your own television shows, you get cast in movies, you get tenure, you get promotion. While there's a great cost to opposing the supremacy, you lose your job, you don't get you get beat up on the streets. And so in the just the cost benefit equation, is Bill Maher really a left wing fanatic, or is he somebody who knows if you want an HBO special, you pretend to be a left wing fanatic? You know, and
you would know.
well, I know there's actually a lot more to the story than most people know.
Yeah, that's right.
He said I would know because I wrote Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher for many years.
And by the way, and when you listen to him, the reality, the fact that he has some of the people on the right that he has, and even though he goes after them, he shows them respect. Indeed. And he beats up on the left from time to time when they're being stupid too.
Indeed. I mean, look, the whole premise, is, I believe it's three leftists and then you get one conservative that they all beat up on. And so, yeah, he does have a conservative on the show, and every once in a while, some of them, I thought Dinesh did great when he was on the show, and in fact,
it's those one-on-one interviews he does, though, too. I mean, that's where it really kind of comes out.
The best. Yeah, that's when he's the best. That being said, I mean, Maher might not have been the best example because he's long established and whatnot. But if you're a young comedian now and you want an HBO special, you better not say I'm pro-Trump. You better not say God bless America. You better not say I'm against abortion on demand. Post-term abortion. You better not say these things. So how many of those people can be won over to the good side by altering the cost-benefit equation? I think there's not an insignificant number. I think that's something we should be going after as well.
And you're far away from the time when a George Carlin can speak honestly about things. And even though he was, not a theist and didn't particularly like religious people in some ways, but he did so from a foundation that I don't think a lot of comedians could come in and do it from this day and age.
I don't think there's anybody out there except me. And
how many gigs you had lately?
Yeah, well, you're not allowed out of the house.
Oh, that's right. What can you do? Well, and which kind of brings me to this. Where are we've talked about the politics of this. So where's the culture right now? And what do you think is driving what we see in the entertainment media nowadays?
Yeah, look, there's only one thing that drives everything in the supremacy, and that's the supremacy. All right. Sometimes it's delivered in more subtle ways. It's not Lenny Riefenstahl any longer because you don't need Lenny Riefenstahl in this day and age. But there's simply no way to get a television show on the air that doesn't lean left and even gratuitously attack conservatives. I forget, it wasn't CSI, it was another one by Dick Wolf, I think it was, that had all these different shows. And the second you saw a Christian, whether it was a priest, whether it was somebody who was devout, whether it was the second you saw a Christian, you knew who the killer was. And were they well written? Were they clever? Were they well acted? Absolutely. But no matter what, there's a story I tell in the Woke Supremacy, and it's about Jimmy Fallon. And Jimmy Fallon had the #1 late night talk show. He was blowing the other two out of the water, Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert. And he had on a guest who was funny, and Fallon was funny, and it almost cost him his career because that guest was Donald Trump. And the next day, Variety wrote about how evil it was that he humanized Trump, because in the supremacy, the other is not to be human. Mm-hmm. The other has to be subhuman. Yeah. All right. And that was and in an instant, he went from first to third. In an instant, the same people who'd been begging to be on his show wouldn't come on his show. He actually tweeted out, I think it was tweeting, But what do you want? I get it. I feel bad. Do you want to keep pushing me? I said, what do you want me to do? Kill myself? He thought
Yeah.
that his friends, his fans, his followers, his colleagues, the people who adored him the day before he tasseled Trump's hair, the next day they wanted him to kill himself because they will not give this much in the culture. So
It is funny because he through most of his career has always been a decent guy, and he'd hit everybody with a joke on every side. I mean, that it's not like he didn't do that, but you could tell that he was a guy who actually respected other people, even when he didn't like them.
In addition, he respected his profession. You see, in a normal world, if you're a comedian, your job is to entertain. In a normal world, if you're a historian, your job is to provide objective and accurate telling of history. In a normal world, if you're a journalist, your job is to even-handedly portray the events of the day. But in the Supremacy, your job in each case is simply to promote the supremacy. Right? So CNN has no journalistic standards. Their standard is what promotes the supremacy. Jimmy Fallon was not supposed to do a late night comedy show. He was supposed to do a late night supremacist show that's centered around comedy.
Well, so I was talking to a friend the other day.
How many friends do you have left?
I think this is one of the 5 that remain.
Okay.
I'm trying to reestablish that with you, so maybe I can get back up to 6 once again. No, anyway, but I'm talking to this friend, and he's like talking about the old Johnny Carson show and also the Dean Martin roasts. Now, when I look at those, and maybe it's because I'm older, and even though Johnny Carson kind of in my generation, but the roasts were kind of in my parents' generation. I was just really young watching them. They stopped in the late 70s. So, I was born in 65. So, but what you see there is the purest form of hilarious comedy. To this day, if I watch those roasts, I'm buckling over laughing. And there's definitely good comedy out there right now. I do see it, and it's really funny. I don't see the consistently excellent comedy. And this friend was telling me, one of the things is he didn't see the uber political nature of it. I remember in one of the roasts they're making fun of Hubert Humphrey, after he had just lost. But still, you could tell it wasn't about beating up on Nixon so much. It was just kind of funny for him. We've lost that kind of comedy in this country, have we not?
We have indeed, and it's all due to the left. The left cannot laugh at itself.
Yeah.
It is like Hitler laughing at himself. It's like Stalin laughing at himself. It's like Mao laughing at himself. When they are gods, well, then to poke fun at God is blasphemy. So you won't see them. On the other hand, they have replaced humor with vitriol for the right. No matter what their job is still to advance the supremacy. And you don't advance the supremacy by saying Barack Obama doesn't have any clothes. Yeah. And you don't advance the supremacy by saying, hey, didn't Donald Trump do a great thing? It's all to advance the supremacy. And when that becomes the job, then humor is no longer your job. There's a story I tell right at the very beginning of the book about a woman named Nancy Spector. Nancy Spector is the curator of a museum in New York City called the Guggenheim. And this is a museum that has a collection that includes Van Goghs and whatnot. I mean,
it's one of the most amazing collections in the world. Absolutely.
Okay, one of those. All right, she also has all the money in the world, thanks to the many and wealthy sponsors. All right. Now that she's in charge of the Guggenheim, she went out and spent a fortune on a gold toilet bowl that she installed in the bathroom, and the toilet bowl is called America.
Yeah.
Right. Now, clearly, she doesn't believe her job is to share great works of art, great works of beauty. Her job is to spread hate for America. Right? She's doing it in the guise of an artist, in the guise of a museum curator, in the guise of beauty. But the standard that made that toilet bowl pretty, beautiful to her, the most beautiful thing there is, right? The most beautiful thing she could get, was the fact that she hates America. Right? And when that becomes your driving force as an artist, when that becomes your driving force as a journalist, when that becomes the driving force, and it's true of every supremacy. The journalist in a Nazi supremacy wasn't a journalist; he was a Nazi, right?
Yeah.
The movie, the filmmaker in a German supremacy wasn't a filmmaker; she was a Nazi making films.
Yep.
And so we don't have comedians whose job is to entertain. They're woke supremacists who tell jokes.
It's kind of funny, as what I've watched recently a few times, Ken Burns' jazz documentary. And during World War II, first of all, jazz was banned in Germany. Mm-hmm. And then when they found out there was a lot of underground jazz clubs all over Berlin or whatever,
Weimar, yeah.
Then they started to do a Hermann Goering apparently put together some jazz bands that were singing propaganda.
Uh-huh.
You know what it's like? By the way, it's the same with that toilet. So what's interesting about the gold toilet is that, and this happens with people who are illogical, irrational, unwilling to see what's evidently before them. So what's interesting is the toilet, which is America, is made out of a precious metal. You know,
and it works.
And it works. But here's the thing: they're defecating on a precious metal. So for them, that's like, oh, we're getting on that America thing. And what the reality that comes into place is that something very precious and beautiful, they're the ones that are harming. I mean, it shows the hypocrisy or the reality, I should say, of who they are.
It just shows that they don't think, that there's absolutely no thought that goes into anything they believe. As you know, I go back to Springsteen and that, but you brought up Goering and the jazz bands and whatnot. Actually, after I tell the Spectre story, I say it's reminiscent of a 1972 movie called Cabaret. Remember the movie Cabaret?
Oh yeah.
And that takes place just on the cusp of the Nazis coming to power. They haven't come to power yet. Right. But now we're in the Cabaret with Joel Grey, who's the nicest guy in the world. Would never think he's a Nazi or a Nazi sympathizer, and he's probably not. But he's singing this song called "If You Could See Her," and as a bit of camp, and he's singing it to a woman dressed as a gorilla. All right. Yeah. And it's really a touching, loving, moving song about tolerance and understanding and the differences that they should. And then he gets to the last line of the song. He says, "If you could see her through my eyes, she wouldn't look Jewish at all." Yeah. Now, there's nothing funny about comparing a Jew to an animal, but the audience in the Nazi nightclub cheer and laugh and applaud. Why? Because what's funny is the shared hatred that the German supremacists had for the other, the Jew. Right. But what makes the toilet bowl beautiful? Only the woke supremacists' shared hatred of America. There's nothing else that makes that toilet bowl beautiful, except for their hatred.
Right. No, it's quite real. So, slightly shifting gears here. So,
but I'm a little bit running out of time. How about till 6 more minutes?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So, what do we need to do from here? If someone reads your book, what's the next step that they need to take?
Yeah, I wrote this first and foremost because the first rule of war, and this is war, and how bloody it gets, we have different notions. I'm thinking it's going to get fairly bloody. But the first rule of war is to know thy enemy. And so first and foremost, I want to steel our side to understand the moral rightness of our cause, that these are not simply nice people with whom we have policy disagreements with. Those days are long gone. These are now the enemy. They've declared war. They declared war again when they said that they were going to be the resistance to a duly elected president of the United States. Barack Obama declared war when he weaponized America against Americans, and we're seeing the war on the streets, and so we really have to get that this is war, and war requires courage and sacrifices. You know, our parents, or maybe perhaps grandparents, had to go off and fight World War II. They risked their lives physically. They had to put their own dreams and businesses on hold. So if you're afraid of angering your cousin, and that's why you're not stepping up and speaking out, you've got to get over that. You've got to recognize this is in fact war. I had originally written in specific actions that can and must be taken. I was implored by numerous people in the know that perhaps I should leave that out at this juncture, with the elections around the corner looming like the landing at Normandy, because that's all it's going to be. Is if Trump wins, we've landed at Normandy, and if Trump doesn't win, we've been repelled. And just because we landed at Normandy, we still have to fight a bloody fight all the way to Berlin. The fight's not over just because we win in November. But to not muddy the waters, I've not put out a specific call to action, but I think you can tell from my words, this is no longer truly a democracy.
Yeah.
Because a democracy requires democratic institutions, right? They had elections in Soviet Russia.
Right.
And Stalin.
They still do in communist China.
Right. So elections in and of themselves do not make a democracy. You need democratic institutions like an honest press, like an educated, not indoctrinated populace. And so we've got to fight back through perhaps whatever means necessary and take back the schools. And that might mean using the same methods they used. They put guns to people's heads when they took over Columbia University. They're still putting guns to people's heads with no justice, no peace. They're still threatening and using violence. And so if we don't have democratic institutions, we don't have a democracy. And we can't play by that, oh, they won an election, now we're going to, Hitler won an election. Hitler came to power. Hitler was the father of democratic socialism. All right? He brought his socialist regime to power through the democratic process. So
Go ahead. So
first and foremost, you got to read my book. It's short. I wrote it to be. I noticed there were two things that accomplished what I wanted to accomplish with this book. One was Uncle Tom's Cabin in its serialized version, and that it was bite-sized, it was digestible, and it laid out the moral clarity of the issue of the Civil War, slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Paine's Common Sense. It was only 50 pages long, but in bite-sized and digestible way, it laid out the moral clarity for the Revolutionary War. You got to have the moral clarity to fight this war. So one, read my book, suggest it to others, and I promised at the end of my book that after the election, I will revisit and come back with specifics that I believe need to be done.
Well, and at that time, and I hope a couple other times before that happens, we need to get back together and talk on this, because these are serious things. I think people are still, some people are still on their heels. They got knocked back a little bit on their heels and are trying to make sense of it right now. And there
are also others who live in a little bit of a bubble, who don't know really how bad it is, don't really know, I will never forget seeing a photograph of Anne Frank and her mother on the beach, smiling and laughing, just 2 or 3 years prior.
Yeah.
It's 2 or 3 years prior. That's how quickly things change.
Yeah, they do. They change very quickly. I'm glad, even though we joked about it earlier, that our friendship hasn't changed. You've been a great friend for a lot of years. I highly respect you as a comedian and an author. You're very insightful. I mean, you really get what's going on out there, and it's very helpful for folks. So I'm so thankful for the work you're doing and that I get to promote it a little bit for you. So, and hopefully we can get back on and kind of flesh some of this out again later.
I'd love to come back on, and I love you, Jim, and I'm grateful for your friendship.
Oh, thank you. And we'll get some links out there when we put this out so people can go get your book and get other things. I'm grateful that you've taken some time with me today, and we'll get back together soon, my friend.
Okay. I look forward to it.
Thanks. Thank you for joining us today on the Against Nice podcast. Please be sure to go to our website, www.politicsisn'tnice.com. You can sign up for our email list there just at the top right of the web page, and make sure to follow us on iTunes. or Spotify or Stitcher or even the iHeartRadio app, and give us a 5-star rating and let people know what you think about our podcast. Again, www.politicsisn'tnice.com. Join our email list at the top right hand of the page there, and follow us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or iHeartRadio. Thanks for joining the show today. We'll be back soon.